So we've already covered Scrum in a little bit of detail in this course. However, Scrum is very massive and it's starting to become really, really popular in most tech and fast-moving industries. The reason being is it's so flexible and it's so defined that it's so easy to implement and to get immediate results from. So, in this section, we're going to be covering Scrum in depth. We're going to start over with another overview, except this time I'm going to link it all together so you can see how it all works out. And then we're going to be going from lecture to lecture, and we're going to be detailing the entire Scrum framework so that if you ever joined a Scrum team, you would know what's going on. You'd understand what's going on. So what we have is we have 3 roles. We have our first role over here, which is going to be our product owner. So what is the product owner's responsibility? The product owner's responsibility is essentially to manage the product. Now, they are not the product manager. That is not a role in Scrum. They're the product owner. What that means is they have ownership of the product, its goals, its trajectories, things like that. So with the product owner, you are essentially the link to the outside world. So they are going to be the ones trying to talk to the stakeholders, which are people that maybe spent money on this. Maybe it's the company you work for. Maybe it's senior management. They're going to be talking to them and trying to get out what management wants. They're going to be trying to figure out what is the overall vision of this. Once they have a good idea of the overall vision, they're going to do their meetings or however that is going to work. They might maybe do some analytics to figure out what the next best step is. All of that's under their realm. Once they have that, they're going to create what is called a product backlog. So what is a product backlog? Well, a product backlog is an organized and prioritized list which details things like the next steps, the overall vision, stuff like that. So they're going to come in to the Scrum team, and these are all part of the Scrum team. There's no it isn't this and then these guys help the Scrum team. These are all the Scrum team together. So this is an entire Scrum team right here. So they're going to help the rest of the process. They're going to supply that vision, and through that, they're going to allow the next scrums and sprints, or the next sprints, to be built. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so we'll continue on with that in a little while. Our next role right here, down here, is going to be our product, or our Scrum Master. The Scrum Master's job sounds simple in comparison to maybe the other things. However, it's very complex and it's good for people, like persons. Essentially, a Scrum Master, what their goal is to implement and maintain Scrum framework. What that means is they're going to be educating the others on their jobs. They actually will help the product owner figure out their job. They'll help the dev team figure out theirs. They'll mitigate any disputes. If their team is unhappy, they're going to figure out how to make their team happy. Maybe it's the tools they're working on. Maybe it's something as simple as the lunch or the schedule. If the team's not happy, they're not going to produce. Have you ever gone into work angry or upset or just really, really tired? You don't work as hard as if you are happy, motivated, and full of energy. So the Scrum Master will try to work with you to get you to a higher productivity level. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to increase this idea of velocity while also maintaining a good workspace. Now, the Scrum Master also has to mediate all disputes. They have to facilitate meetings. They have to educate others on their goals, and they have to remove roadblocks for your team. So if your team comes up and they say, for example, the air conditioning is too low. It's freezing in here. Everyone agrees it's freezing. Everyone on this floor hates it. The Scrum Master's job that day might be to go contact the facility people and try to figure out how they can get it warmer in there. Another thing, maybe the tools. These MacBooks are not going to be able to develop what we need to develop. We need PCs because we're trying to build on a PC, so we need to test for a PC. They need to go contact hardware and figure out how they can get some PCs up to the floor or in the room so that they can begin testing. Scrum Master is the guy who keeps everyone in order and tries to keep the team going. He's not the leader. That's a common misconception. He does not order anyone to do anything. What he does is he asks, he finds, and he facilitates, essentially as a coach or a mentor role to keep the team producing. Our next set is the most important just because nothing gets done without them, and that is our dev team. So the dev team is everyone else. It's the development team. Now, with a dev team, you might think, well, how would a dev team how would it work? Essentially, in an ideal Scrum framework, the dev team is a set of full stack engineers. What that means is that every person on the dev team can do everything. Now, there might be strengths, there might be areas that they're better off in, but they can all do everything, even down to potentially some designing. And why does that make them more effective? Well, to have a fluid team like that, imagine the tasks you could get accomplished. Some weeks are going to be programming heavy. Some weeks might be design heavy. Some weeks might be architecture and fixing bugs heavy. If you have only 2 people on your team that can do each one of the tasks I just represented, the rest of the team will just sit around. There's not a lot for them to do. So they need to learn how to do everything so that the team can always mold and adjust and keep moving forward. The dev team is very important, and it's also very important to note that the dev team needs to be, for an effective Scrum, 3 to 9 people. Any less than 3, and you don't have that sort of serendipitous communication between each other, ideas aren't built upon, roadblocks halt the entire team. Imagine if you have a single developer, then what if a bug is breaking the app and it takes them 2 weeks to find that bug? Well, that's 2 weeks of no production. So not only did it take them 2 weeks to find the bug, but it was 2 weeks that nothing else was getting done. That's important because maybe if you had 3 people, 2 of them could have worked on that bug, knocked it out in 4 days, and the other one could have kept working in the background on another feature. And then suddenly in 2 weeks, you not only have the bug, but you have multiple additional features built as well. There's no permanent blockage. So 3 to 9 people on that. So the Scrum Master, the dev team, and the product owner are all part of your team. Now then, how does the Scrum work? We have all of our people. Let's go over the Scrum itself. So we have basically the start of a sprint. Scrum is built up into sprints like we talked about in the earlier lecture in Agile. These sprints are essentially the repeating area here. So it's going to be a repetitious way of developing. They're typically 1 to 4 weeks with a recommendation of as quick as you can do it, but 2 weeks kind of sounds like the prime. If you have something where deploying and testing only takes like half a day or less, then you might be looking at a 1 week sprint and you can adjust even quicker for that. But 2 weeks is a good place to aim for. So 1 to 4 weeks. Now, with this 1 to 4 week sprint, we have what is known as daily stand-ups as well. And so we're going to talk about that in just a second, but we're going to add that in here so you know that that's in the 1 to 4 week sprint. But before we get there, how do we get to the sprint? So let's go back to the product backlog. What we have is we have a sprint planning meeting. This starts after the sprint begins. So the sprint will be like, let's say it begins October 2nd. You do not do the planning on October 1st. Then the sprint would have started on October 1st. You do the planning on October 2nd in the sprint. Everything is encapsulated in a single sprint. There's no outside obligation or anything like that. So you have sprint planning going. What you do in a sprint planning meeting, we're going to be going over in depth in different tutorials or a different lecture. But the essence of it is the sprint planning is going to take our product backlog. So we're going to take the backlog, and then with the help of the product owner is going to sort of give some direction. And at the same time, the dev team is going to give their input and choose what they're going to work on. The product owner is going to recommend or sort of give an idea of what the next steps are going to be. This is the goal that we want to reach. Here are all the items that need to be completed. And then the dev team is going to take that. They're going to look through it, and they're going to create a sprint. Now, the important part, something that comes out of this sprint planning, is an idea of a sprint goal. What is a sprint goal? A sprint goal is extremely important, and especially with more recent iterations of Sprint and Scrums, you're going to be hearing sprint goals a lot more. It's an idea of what they're going to be doing in the next 1 to 4 weeks. Let's say we're doing 2 week sprints. In the next 2 weeks, what is our goal? Is it to clean up the app and pay off technical debt? Is it to add that new feature so you can add reviews to, for example, let's say your product, maybe you have a web store and you want to be able to have reviews on there? Is that what you're working towards? Are you working towards the goal of adding it to the Internet of Things? So, now the Bluetooth watch works with it. What's your sprint goal? What are you working towards in this sprint? And then once you have that sprint goal, you're going to look at the product backlog. You're going to make yourself what we call a sprint backlog right here. So the sprint backlog, which is essentially going to be the mini backlog, the sprint backlog is going to be what you're working on in the sprint. How do you choose who works on what? That's the magic here. And this is why it's important to have full stack or really developed, or at least just developers with different expertise. The developer team gets to choose what they work on. They all look at the list and they're like, well, I'm going to begin working on this. I'm going to begin working on that. And you just start your development process. So the sprint planning creates the sprint backlog. Now the sprint has begun. And now we're into our daily stand-ups. What are we doing in the daily stand-ups? We are looking at the sprint goal. So we're taking note of that sprint goal. And we're trying to figure out what we can do to reach that sprint goal. Maybe we need to prioritize some things. So maybe we look at the sprint backlog as a dev team and we list them in an order like, hey guys, let's try to focus on these tasks first. Now, again, we're not commanding anyone about it. The Scrum Master is sort of facilitating any arguments or trying to make sure everything's going smoothly. We're looking at the sprint goal. We're saying maybe we're not going to be able to reach the entirety of the backlog. You want to try to clear it, but maybe it's not going to. So how do we prioritize it to best represent our sprint goal in this sprint? Prioritize your cards a little bit and say, let's focus on this. So that's what's going to be a starting point. And then after that, it's going to be a little bit of a status meeting. It's not supposed to be too much of that, but essentially you're going to be talking about three main things. What did you do yesterday? What are you going to try to get done today? And are there any blockers? And the blockers are going to go straight to your Scrum Master. You don't talk about them here. You just talk about the general overview here, but you don't fix them. You're not wasting everyone's time. Imagine a team of 9 people and you're trying to help a single person, fix their web browser. It wastes everyone's time. 15 minutes is about the time box for this. You don't want your daily stand-up to be any greater than 15 minutes. If there's something that needs to be greater than 15 minutes that comes up in your daily stand-up, the Scrum Master is going to try to find a time to talk about it with only the people it's relevant later on in the day. So maybe they need to have a quick meeting about browser support. Maybe they need to have a quick meeting about what the sprint goal really means or something like that. They might need to talk later on in the day, but not during your daily stand-up. Once your daily stand-ups are done, the sprint gets done, then we move on into what we call the sprint review. So everything is looking good, and now we are going to move on to the sprint review. This is going to involve basically everyone, including stakeholders. It's the only time that the outside world gets to come in and look at it. You're going to be showing off your product. Now, the important part here, it's a product increment. What does this mean? This means that it's a working product. There is no half-completed things. This is a product in and of itself, and it's an increment. Think of like an app. It's something that you can release as an update. It's a new part of a program. It's tested. It's ready to be released. It is not halfway work in progress. If your sprints are ending with halfway works in progress, then you need to figure out how to break up the larger projects a little bit better. But anyway, again, we're going to talk about all this a little bit later on. The sprint review is just for everyone to come in. You're going to all discuss what you've worked on. You're going to talk to the stakeholders, figure out what their ideas of it are, release the product increment, and then from the feedback from here, you're going to go back to sprint planning and start your next sprint. Finally, before it's all over, there's one last step, and that is going to be the sprint retrospective. What is a sprint retrospective? This is for the Scrum team. So all of these people over here, including your product owner, where you're going to try to talk about what went wrong in the last sprint. Let's say your product owner isn't writing the cards or the way that you work good enough. You're constantly having to go to your Scrum Master or contact the product owner himself and figure out what on earth they were talking about. You're asking questions, well, what color should it be? You're asking questions, well, how does this actually fit into anything that we're doing? Or how do we recreate this bug? All you said was this button doesn't show up, but it shows up for me. So what are we recreating here? So you might be bringing that up in the meeting and try to get the product owner to write better product backlog items so things go smoother. Maybe your Scrum Master didn't facilitate discussion enough, or maybe there were arguments and your Scrum Master ignored the arguments and now the team's angry because they can't figure out something and the Scrum Master did nothing to help it. Dev team. Maybe the dev team dropped the ball somewhere. Maybe we have a skill shortage that we need to look at how we can train into. Maybe our dev team is too small or too large, or we need some help or something like that. All happens in the sprint retrospective. How do we make the next sprint better than this sprint? What are some big things that we can change? What are some small things that we can change so that every sprint is better than the previous and we're constantly learning? That overall is the Scrum overview. This is basically all you're ever going to need to know about Scrum. These are all the different elements of it. And now we're going to dive into each one of these in more depth so that we have, again, a better understanding of this. And if you ever joined a Scrum team, you'll just fit right in and you'll know what everyone is talking about.